Okay, so here I am, and I've decided I'm not going to wait on the selective or elective mutism video. Actually, I'm going to just give a brief description of selective mutism and explain the importance of a good support system, um, especially familial support system, because those are the people we're familiar with throughout life, not just in a childhood with a child that suffers from selective mutism, but also throughout adulthood. Because I don't really have a whole lot of information on it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read what I have right here from ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. This is the U.S. National Library of Medicine, the National Institute of Health. Selective mutism is a disorder in which an individual fails to speak in certain social situations, though speaks normally in other settings. Most commonly, this disorder initially manifests when children fail to speak in school. Selective mutism results in significant social and academic impairment in those affected by it. And this review will summarize the current understanding of selective mutism with regard to diagnosis, epidemiology, cause, prognosis, and treatment. I'm not going to read all of that. Recent findings, studies over the past 20 years have consistently demonstrated a strong relationship between selective mutism and anxiety, most notably social phobia. These findings have led to the recent reclassification of selective mutism as an anxiety disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the 5th edition. In addition to anxiety, several other factors have been implicated in the development of selective mutism, including communication delays and immigration bilingualism, adding to the complexity of the disorder. In the past few years, several randomized studies have supported the efficacy of psychosocial interventions based on a graduated exposure to situations requiring verbal communication. My personal experience, and I didn't know that this is what this was until now, when I started to do research on it. When I was a child, I was in, and I've mentioned this before in other videos, I was in a juvenile detention center where I was molested by one of the corrections officers. One of the officers that was very rarely, if ever, interacting with the inmates. He was one that was behind the glass in the bubble, as people call it. I don't remember his name. I don't remember his name. I did mention it to a couple DOs, but the issue was never, as far as I know, addressed. My parents didn't know about it. I just recently told my aunt about it. But that was the very first time I experienced selective mutism. This person just took me from my cell at a late hour of the evening. I think it was like probably between 10 and 11 at night when all the other inmates were in their cells. Took me to the nurse's station, did what he did, and I said nothing. I could say nothing. I didn't know what to say. I obviously was at a loss of words. Now, I don't know if this can be classified as the same thing, but based on my experiences throughout life, many of my intimate, and I don't want to call them intimate situations because they weren't intimate situations. They were, I already have difficulty, like, in situations with people I'm not familiar with. I'm very protective of myself now as far as who I'll be alone with, who I'll spend time with without any other people present. And that's because it's for their safety and for mine, because apparently there's some difficulty in understanding when I'm interested and when I'm not. I do have a sarcastic, and they say people with autism spectrum disorder don't understand sarcasm. That's not what it is. It's that we have a different sarcasm. Like most people don't understand our sarcasm, and then we don't understand theirs. So it's like, it's not that we don't understand sarcasm and that we're not sarcastic. It's that we find we have a different idea of what's funny, and sometimes it's inappropriate. So, and I'm also, this is getting off into a different subject, but when I discuss things to me that are normal, natural behaviors in life, I don't believe they should be so taboo and so off limits and so forbidden as society has made them, because that's what causes problems with people being able to use self-control and learning when to discern, etc. But that's a whole nother video. So as far as the selective mutism goes, there's been several times that I have been in a situation where I don't know what to say. I can't say no. I'm not comfortable. stopping anyone from initiating anything. I'm not comfortable walking away from a situation. I'm not comfortable expressing that I don't want to do something. And that's why I'm very protective of who I will be alone with or who I will be alone around. There's also been situations where I've initiated intimacy because I wanted to make sure that there was no question, so that they knew that I was the one interested, that it wasn't anything they were pushing me to do or anything I was doing because I felt I had to. Because in my own mind, I'd been in that situation so many times and couldn't say anything and didn't know how to respond. And I do honestly believe it was selective mutism, and I do still have a problem with this. But like I said, I protect myself by deciding who I'm around and who I'm with alone. I lost what I was saying. As far as initiating things on my own, sometimes that's not healthy either, because I will initiate sooner than myself or someone else might be ready for, and but I do that out of protective measures for them, so they understand that it was something I wanted as well. It wasn't something that anyone was forcing me to do. And many times I don't believe they even understood or knew that that was a part of my thought process. Like, they didn't actively know or understand that in my mind I'm thinking, geez, I don't want them to feel like they're pressuring me. I don't want to feel pressured, or I don't feel pressured. I don't want them to think I'm feeling pressured. Don't want them to think that I'm going to turn around later and be like, oh, I didn't want to do this. I wanted to prevent that from happening, but I honestly don't believe that they even knew in their minds that that was a part of my thought process. And many times it still is. So, selective mutism, I don't believe it's just isolated to school-age children. I don't believe it's just isolated to social situations. Intimate situations are just as social as social situations. It's you and another person. So I think people like myself that are vulnerable in that area need to have a good, strong familial support, a good, strong support system with the people that they trust and that they are safe around. I'm starting to get emotional because for the past probably 15 years, I was stranded in California in a situation where I was sexually abused, emotionally abused, physically abused, and my child was also emotionally and physically abused by someone who did not understand boundaries in any way, shape, or form, was not able to set healthy boundaries, was not able to respect healthy boundaries, and this resulted in my being abused in every way possible by this person repeatedly for almost 15 years. Even when I separated myself from him in this situation, I was still vulnerable to that because the courts allowed him custody of my child, and every interaction we had was very uncomfortable, was very inappropriate the majority of the time. My efforts to tell him to stop doing things that made me uncomfortable were usually fruitless, I guess would be the word for it. He wouldn't ever respond or accommodate my wishes as far as him touching me without permission, or any of the things he would say to me that were inappropriate in my eyes or uncomfortable for me to hear or discuss. 9 times out of 10 regarding our interactions and relations prior to that moment. But anyhow, family and friends are very important, people that you can be safe with. So if you have autism spectrum disorder or any other disorder that also has a comorbidity of selective mutism, you need to be sure, and the people around you, the people that love you, the people in your support system need to be sure that you are always, even as an adult, someone like me has to have a very good support system of people they can trust that will not cross those boundaries, that will not, will not disrespect your boundaries, that will respect the boundaries that you set, will help you set healthy boundaries, will help you practice that, because selective mutism doesn't have to be anything that's persistent or progressive. It from what I read, can be worked through. Because it is a social anxiety. It's an anxiety. It's an anxiety of not knowing how to react, not knowing what to say, maybe not having been in that situation before, or having been in that situation before, and it being a violent or abusive situation, which makes it even more uncomfortable or more difficult to say no in the future, or to put yourself in the position where you might have to be combative with someone, or put yourself in the position where you might have to defend yourself. Sometimes it's easier just to comply than to cause conflict. So make sure you have a good, strong support system. Make sure that you work on these things. Make sure that in your time, don't let anybody force you. Because I did notice another thing in my recovery from the exacerbation of my disorders, my difference. I prefer difference over disorder. I don't think disorder is a fair way to put it, because we have strengths in some areas that other people don't, and we have weaknesses in areas that a lot of people don't. So it's just a difference. It's not necessarily a disorder, because it can go both ways. And just because theirs is the social norm of functionality and order doesn't mean some of their life, which is normal to us and functional to us. You understand what I'm saying. Needless to say, this is a very uncomfortable subject for me, and a lot of people that know me know that I have the gift of gab. Sometimes it's difficult to get a word in edgewise, especially if it's something I'm very passionate about, or something I really, I don't know. Many times when I'm nervous, I just can't shut up, and then I just start talking about stuff that doesn't even make sense. But anyhow, selective mutism, it can be very dangerous. It's not just isolated to school-age children. It's not just isolated to social situations. You have to be sure that you protect the people that you care about and the people that you love from others that will not respect their boundaries, others that will prey upon them and manipulate them, take advantage of them. Coercive control is very easy to be successful, or to successfully achieve with someone like me. I was left alone in California because the person I what's the word? I accompanied someone to California to visit his family, his sister and his aunts and cousins or something. And he ended up being arrested, so I was left there alone. And that's when the person who had my child for the past 12 years took advantage of my isolation, took advantage of my vulnerability, and knew that no one knew me, knew that I wasn't comfortable and I didn't feel safe, and made sure that nobody had the right impression of who I was or what I was doing or what kind of person I was. He made sure that the first thing he did was to destroy my reputation, even though I didn't have one. I wasn't even anyone that was from that part of town, but from that state for that matter. And he made it very difficult for me to, it already being difficult for me to relate to my family and friends or people that I trusted that I needed to get out of there. He made it even more difficult because he had other agencies like CPS and the judicial system coming in and labeling me as certain things, and my family taking those things into account and assuming that they were telling the truth just because of who they were. The judicial system and CPS, my family was taking everything they were saying as being truthful, and it was far from the case. Needless to say, many of my interactions with that person were sexually abusive. They were not consensual. They were not anything I wanted to do, but they were not anything I knew how to avoid. They weren't anything I knew how to explain to anybody. And many times I was very shameful about them. I felt like it was my fault, like I was so stupid I couldn't even tell him to leave me alone, and that I deserved it if I couldn't stand up for myself. So be sure that the people that you care about, if you know that they have autism spectrum disorder, if you know that they have issues with selective mutism, those are very vulnerable times when you can't speak up for yourself, even as an adult, especially as a child, but even as an adult. Those are the times we're most vulnerable, and we literally can't speak up. So be sure to be there for your family. Be sure to be there and help them work through these things. You have to let them work at their pace, though. You have to let them get comfortable with these situations at their pace, because the more you push people and the more you force us into being comfortable with something, the more anxiety we build up, and the higher the possibility of worsening our condition in regards to that. So, and I learned that by pushing myself too hard. Not just CPS and the judicial system forcing me to go to mental health, forcing me to take medication, forcing me to do all these interactions with the asshole that was, sorry, excuse the language, but the person who was perpetrating all this abuse on me and my child. Not only forcing interactions between he and I, but not believing me when I did report the things that were happening, not believing that he was dangerous to either one of us. And then me trying to force myself to be comfortable with it, because I felt the sooner I did everything the way they wanted me to, the sooner I'd be able to get my daughter back and she'd be safe. But that wasn't the case. It made me worse. I nearly went through a psychotic break where I was this close to losing everything. And people not understanding how difficult it was for me to be calm and relay my needs, communicate my needs, express what I needed to express, and help them understand that a lot of what they were hearing was untruthful or dishonest, incorrect, and that it was imperative for us to get away. All of that compounded, and not understanding my selective mutism myself. When I finally did come forward about this abuse, they've pretty much just brushed it off and ignored it. I don't know that I will ever receive justice. My concern at this point is that the person works with disabled and vulnerable people. I'm finally away from the abuse. Me and my daughter are finally away from the abuse. We're finally safe in Arizona, and hopefully we remain so, but there are vulnerable people that are being exposed to this person, vulnerable people like me, and some that are even more impaired than I was, more unable to speak up for themselves, and that's a big concern for me. So I just wanted to get this video out there to help people understand, because I know I'm getting a lot of criticism as far as expressing my experience with sexual abuse, especially with this person in California. So this person, his name is Jeffrey Martin Miller. He's a convicted sex offender. He's a convicted sex offender against minors. And my daughter and I were exposed to him for 14 years. So against our will. And both of us were abused the whole time. So now that we're away, now that we're safe, I'm allowed to express these things. I can express them a bit more appropriately than I was before. I did have some videos on my channel that were kind of out there. But if people can understand that those videos were made out of desperation, and they were actually not an irrational reaction to anything. It was a very rational and understandable response on my part by someone who was in fear of her and her child's life and future and safety, etc. So whether you choose to agree with that or not, I mean, it's up to you. You don't have to take that for a grain of salt if you don't want to, but I know now that based on my ability to function and feel safe at this point, the past 14 years, almost 15 years of my life have been wasted. And I was literally disabled by the state of California, Riverside County specifically, CPS and Larson Justice Center, and Jeffrey Martin Miller, and their failure to protect. Their failure to protect under the color of the law. I believe that's how you say it, but I'm not sure. Anyhow, selective mutism is very real. It is very, it's very scary for the people that experience it. And then to have a difficulty communicating about it afterwards, I don't know for others. I can only speak for myself. I know for myself, like, I just barely came to understand this after years of feeling stupid, like feeling like maybe all of these things happened because I let them happen, because I didn't stop them from happening, because I didn't say anything. Like, why didn't I say anything? Why couldn't I say anything? Why? How can I blame anyone but myself? And now that I understand it, it's frustrating still, but you don't know how to explain that to people that are neurotypical or don't have a disorder like this. And I do believe that it began after I was molested in juvenile detention center, and that was the very first time I actually experienced selective mutism. Not being able to say anything at all. And even afterwards, not being comfortable or knowing how to explain what had actually happened. I think all I mentioned was that I was having problems with I had a problem with one of the detention officers. Anyhow, that's it. I just wanted to share that. Hopefully it was useful. I will come back with more research-based information that might be useful. Any comments? Down below, like, share. Thanks for watching.